you want me to tell you a story? I think we all need to hear a story. Or at least the end of one. Okay. If you would like to stay with us, feel free. So, today we're reading chapter 30 of To Kill a Mockingbird. Chapter 30. So in chapter 29, we had the reveal of Boo Radley. We had Scout telling her side of the attack from Mr. Yule on her and Jem, and the rescue that Boo Radley did for them. And we had the last lines of, "Hey Boo." So yes, Scout has met Mr. Radley, and we are now going to get a little more on the whole encounter and maybe figure out how exactly Mr. Yule ended up with a kitchen knife in his ribs. So, I don't get my hand back? Okay. It's a good thing I'm good at this. So we're in chapter 30. "Mr. Arthur, honey," said Atticus, gently correcting me. "Jean Louise, this is Mr. Arthur Radley. I believe he already knows you." Now, why would Arthur Radley know or already know Scout? Well, because they've spent many summers kind of harassing him. They tried to sneak into his house. They've tried to send him a letter on a fishing rod. She's rolled into his front yard. They walk by his place all the time. So there's probably been many moments where Mr. Radley has seen or met or heard of Scout and Jem and Dill. If Atticus could blandly introduce me to Boo Radley at a time like this, well, that was Atticus. So yeah, Atticus is very just like, yeah, that's Boo. It's not this big dramatic reveal like we all would expect. He's just like, that's Mr. Arthur. And that's it. Boo saw me run instinctively to the bed where Jem was sleeping, for the same shy smile crept across his face. Hot with embarrassment, I tried to cover up by covering Jem up. Don't touch him," Atticus said. Mr. Hecate sat, looking intently at Boo through his horn-rimmed glasses. He was about to speak when Dr. Reynolds came down the hall. "Everybody out," he said, as he came in the door. "Evening, Arthur. Didn't notice you the first time I was here." Dr. Reynolds' voice was as breezy as his step, as though he had said it every evening of his life, an announcement that astounded me even more than being in the same room with Boo Radley. Of course. Even Boo Radley got sick sometimes, I thought. But on the other hand, I wasn't sure. Dr. Reynolds was carrying a big package wrapped in newspaper. He put it down on Jem's desk and took off his coat. "You're quite satisfied he's alive now?" "Tell you how I knew. When I tried to examine him, he kicked me. Had to put him out good and proper to touch him. So, scat, he said to me. Said Atticus, glancing at Boo. "Heck, let's go out on the front porch. There are plenty of chairs out there, and it's still warm enough." I wondered why Atticus was inviting us to the front porch instead of the living room. Then I understood. The living room lights were awfully strong. So what do you think that means? The living room lights are strong. Well, from what we know of the Radley house, it's very dark. Very, very dark in there. So it's unlikely that Boo is used to such brightness. So Atticus is saying, okay, let's go out into the porch where it's darker and the light isn't as bright. We filed out. First, Mr. Tate. Atticus was waiting at the door for him to go ahead of him. Then he changed his mind and followed Mr. Tate. People have a habit of doing everyday things even under the oddest conditions. I was no exception. "Come along, Mr. Arthur," I heard myself saying. "You don't know the house real well. I'll just take you to the porch, sir. He looked down at me and nodded. I led him through the hall and past the living room. Won't you have a seat, Mr. Arthur? This rocking chair is nice and comfortable. My small fantasy about him was alive again. He would be sitting on the porch. Right pretty spell we're having, isn't it, Mr. Arthur? So this is referring to a few chapters back where Scout was kind of reminiscing on the whole Radley thing and was like, oh, you know what, one day he'll be outside sitting on the porch and I'm just going to act very nonchalant. I'm just going to be like, hey, Mr. Arthur, lovely weather we're having. That was her whole entire thing of just meeting him once in her life and being just like, oh, this is a normal thing. And here she is kind of having that moment. Yes, a right pretty spell. Feeling slightly unreal, I led him to the chair furthest from Atticus and Mr. Tate. It was in deep shadow. Boo would feel more comfortable in the dark. Atticus was sitting in the swing and Mr. Tate was in a chair next to him. The lights from the living room windows was strong on them. I sat beside Boo. Well, heck, Atticus was saying. I guess the thing to do... Good Lord, I'm losing my memory. Atticus pushed up his glasses and pressed his fingers to his eyes. Jem's not quite 13. No, he's already 13. I can't remember. Anyway, it'll come before county court. What will, Mr. Finch? Mr. Tate uncrossed his legs and leaned forward. Of course it was clear-cut self-defense, but I'll have to go to the office and hunt up. Mr. Finch, do you think Jem killed Bob Buell? Do you think that? You heard what Scout said. There's no doubt about it. She said Jem got up and yanked him off her. He probably got a hold of Ewell's knife somehow in the dark. We'll find out tomorrow. Mr. Finch, hold on, said Mr. Tate. Jem never stabbed Bob Ewell. Atticus was silent for a moment. He looked at Mr. Tate as if he appreciated what he said, but Atticus shook his head. Heck, it's mighty kind of you, and I know you're doing it from the good heart of yours, but don't start anything like that. Mr. Tate got up and went to the edge of the porch. He spat into the shrubbery, then thrust his hands into his hip pockets and faced Atticus. Like what? He said. I'm sorry if I spoke sharply, Heck, Atticus said simply, but nobody's hushing this up. I don't live that way. Nobody's gonna hush anything up, Mr. Finch. Because remember, right now Atticus is very much of the belief that Jem is the one who stabbed Mr. Ewell. Jem is the one who will need a defense and who will be going to court. That is Atticus's belief. Mr. Tate's voice was quiet, but his boots were planted so solidly on the porch front floorboards, it seemed that they grew there. A curious contest, the nature of which eluded me, was developing between my father and the sheriff. It was Atticus's turn to get up and go to the edge of the porch. He said, and spat dryly into the yard. He put his hands in his pocket and faced Mr. Tate. Heck, you haven't said it, but I know what you're thinking. Thank you for it. Jean Louise, he turned to me. You said Jem yanked Mr. Ewell off you. Yes, sir, that's what I thought. See there, Heck? Thank you from the bottom of my heart, but I don't want my boy starting out with something like this over his head. Best way to clear the air is to have it all out in the open. Let the county come and bring sandwiches. I don't want him growing up with a whisper about him. I don't want anybody saying, Jem Finch, his daddy paid a mint to get him out of that. Sooner we get this over with, the better. Mr. Finch, said Mr. Tate stolidly, Bob Ewell fell on his knife. He killed himself. So Atticus is very much of the mindset of, heck, you are not going to cover this up. I know Jem killed Mr. Ewell. You can't hush this up. I don't want anyone in town whispering like, oh, well, he was able to pay his way out of this crime. And heck, Tate, Sheriff Tate is now saying, that's not what happened. Bob Ewell killed himself. He fell on his own knife. Atticus walked to the corner of the porch. He looked at the wisteria vine. In his own way, I thought, each was as stubborn as the other. I wondered who would give in first. Atticus's stubbornness was quiet and rarely evident, but in some ways, he was as set as the Cunninghams. Mr. Tate's was unschooled and blunt, but it was equal to my father's. Heck, Atticus's back was turned. If this thing's hushed up, it'll be a simple denial to Jem of the way I've tried to raise him. Sometimes I think I'm a total failure as a parent, but I'm all they've got. Before Jem looks at anyone else, he looks at me, and I've tried to live so I can look squarely back at him. If I connived at something like this, frankly, I couldn't meet his eye, and the day I can't do that, I'll know I've lost him. I don't want to lose him and Scout, because they're all I've got. So Atticus is saying, heck, I cannot hush this up. I cannot say that Bob Ewell fell on his knife. I am trying to be honest with my kids, and if I try and cover this up, I can never look at them the same way. I can't have them look at me. We'll have broken that trust. Mr. Finch, Mr. Tate was still planted to the floorboards. Bob Ewell fell on his knife. I can prove it. Atticus wheeled around. His hands dug into his pockets. Heck, can't you even try to see it my way? You've got children of your own, but I'm older than you. When mine are grown, I'll be an old man if I'm still around. But right now, if they don't trust me, they won't trust anybody. Jem and Scout know what happened. If they hear of me saying downtown something different happened, heck, I won't have them anymore. I can't live one way in town and another way in my home. So again, he's very much, if I lie to my kids, I can't live that way. I just can't live lying to my kids. I can't tell them one thing outside of the house and another inside of it. I can't live that way. Thank you for trying to help me with this and get Jem off of this case or off of this charge, but that is not how I can live. We have to go forward with Jem going to court for the murder of Bob Ewell. Mr. Tate rocked on his heels and said patiently, he'd flung Jem down. He stumbled over a root under that tree, and look, I can show you. Mr. Tate reached in his side pocket and withdrew a long switchblade knife. As he did so, Dr. Reynolds came to the door. The son, deceased under that tree, doctor, just inside the schoolyard. Got a flashlight? Better have this one. I can ease around and turn my car lights on, said Dr. Reynolds, but he took Mr. Tate's flashlight. Jem's all right. He won't wake up tonight. I hope, so don't worry. That the knife that killed him, heck? No, sir. Still in him. Looks like a kitchen knife from the handle. Ken ought to be there with the hearse by now, doctor. Night. Mr. Tate flicked open the knife. It was like this, he said. He held the knife and pretended to stumble as he leaned forward. His left arm went down in front of him. See, there? Stabbed himself through that soft stuff between his ribs. His whole weight drove into it. So he's saying that in his left hand, he had the knife, and it went like this, and he stumbled and fell, and it went into him. That is Sheriff Tate's conclusion, is that he fell into his knife. He had a switchblade, or he's using the switchblade as an example, and it just fell and got him right in between the ribs. Mr. Tate closed the knife and jammed it back in his pocket. Scout is 8 years old, he said. She was too scared to know exactly what went on. You'd be surprised, Atticus said grimly. I'm not saying she made it up. I'm saying she was too scared to know exactly what happened. It was mighty dark out there, black as ink. Takes somebody mighty used to the dark to make a competent witness. I won't have it, Atticus said softly. God damn it, I'm not thinking of Jem. Mr. Tate's boot hit the floorboard so hard the lights in Miss Maudie's bedroom went on. Miss Stephanie Crawford's light went on. Atticus and Mr. Tate looked across the street, then at each other. They waited. Who do you think he suspects to be the one who killed Mr. Ewell? When Mr. Tate spoke again, his voice was barely audible. Mr. Finch, I hate to fight you when you're like this. You've been under a strain tonight no man should ever have to go through. Why you ain't in the bed from it, I don't know. But I do know that for once, you haven't been able to put 2 and 2 together, and we've got to settle this tonight because tomorrow will be too late. Bob Ewell's got a kitchen knife in his craw. Mr. Tate added that Atticus wasn't going to stand there and maintain that any boy Jem's size with a busted arm had fight enough left in him to tackle and kill a grown man in the pitch dark. "Heck," said Atticus abruptly. "That was a switchblade you were waving." "Where'd you get it?" "Took it off a drunk man," Mr. Tate answered coolly. I was trying to remember. Mr. Yule was on me, then he went down. Jem must have gotten up, at least I thought. "Heck, I said I took it off a drunk man downtown tonight. Yule probably found that kitchen knife in the dump somewhere. Honed it down and bided his time. Just bided his time." Atticus made his way to the swing and sat down. His hands dangled limply between his knees. He was looking at the floor. He moved with the same slowness that night in front of the jail, when I thought it took him forever to fold his newspaper and toss it in his chair. Mr. Tate clumped softly around the porch. "It ain't your decision, Mr. Finch. It's all mine. It's my decision and my responsibility. For once, if you don't see it my way, there's not much you can do about it. If you want to try, I'll call you a liar to your face. Your boy never stabbed Bob Yule," he said slowly. "Didn't come near a mile of it, and now you know it. All he wanted to do was get him and his sister safely home." Mr. Tate stopped pacing. He stood in front of Atticus, and his back was to us. "I'm not a very good man, sir, but I am a sheriff of Macomb County. Lived in this town all my life, and I'm going on 43 years old. Known everything that's happened here since before I was born. There's a black boy dead for no reason, and the man responsible for it's dead. Let the dead bury the dead this time, Mr. Finch. Let the dead bury the dead." Mr. Tate went to the swing and picked up his hat. It was lying beside Atticus. Mr. Tate pushed back his hair and put his hat on. "I've never heard tell that it's against the law for a citizen to do his utmost to prevent a crime from being committed, which is exactly what he did. But maybe you'll say it's my duty to tell the town all about it and not hush it up. Know what happened then? All the ladies in Macomb, including my wife, be knocking on his door bringing angel food cakes." Who's the he that he's saying? "To my way of thinking, Mr. Finch, take the one man who's done you and this town a great service and dragging him with his shy ways into the limelight. To me, that's a sin. It's a sin, and I'm not about to have it on my head. If it was any other man, it'd be different. But not this man, Mr. Finch." So who is this man that Sheriff Tate is talking about? Well, it's Boo. It's Arthur Radley. He's saying it'd be a sin to have everyone all of a sudden be surrounding him. He hasn't interacted with anyone for 30 plus years. Maybe Dr. Reynolds, but that's about it. And with Macomb finding out that Arthur Radley saved the lives of Jem and Scout, saved the lives of 2 children, every person in Macomb would be descending upon his house and would not leave him alone. And for someone who hasn't interacted in 30 plus years with anyone, except maybe his own family members, and who knows how those interactions go, it would be a terrible shock to the system, and Tate believes it would be a sin to do so to him. Mr. Tate was trying to dig a hole in the floor with the toe of his boots. He pulled his nose, then he massaged his left arm. "I may not be much, Mr. Finch, but I'm still sheriff of Macomb County, and Bob Yule fell on his knife. Good night, sir." Mr. Tate stamped off the porch and strode across the front yard. His car door slammed and he drove away. Atticus sat looking at the floor for a long time. Finally, he raised his head. "Scout," he said, "Mr. Yule fell on his knife. Can you understand?" Atticus looked like he needed cheering up. I ran to him and hugged him and kissed him with all my might. "Yes, sir, I understand," I reassured him. Mr. Tate was right. Atticus disengaged himself and looked at me. "What do you mean?" "Well, it'd be sort of like shooting a mockingbird, wouldn't it?" Atticus put his face in my hair and rubbed it. When he got up and walked across the porch into the shadows, his youthful step had returned. Before he went inside the house, he stopped in front of Boo Radley. "Thank you for my children, Arthur," he said. Okay. That is the end of chapter 30. We got a little more on the actual crime that occurred. So Atticus very much believed at the beginning of this chapter that Jem killed Mr. Yule, that he somehow got a hold of Mr. Yule's knife and stabbed him. So he was very much of the mindset of, I need to prepare a case, I need to figure out what I'm going to be doing, I need to figure out the steps, and there's no way we're going to cover this up because I cannot lie to my kids, and I cannot let Jem go around with people whispering that the only reason why he's got away with it is because his dad paid off someone. And Mr. Hectate, Sheriff Hectate, was saying, no, Mr. Yule fell on his knife. And he showed us with a switchblade he got off a drunkard. And we most likely can assume that the switchblade he was using to demonstrate, he actually got off of Mr. Yule. And that the knife, the kitchen knife, that Mr. Yule was stabbed with was actually Arthur Boo Radley's kitchen knife. And he is the one who killed Bob Yule and saved the lives of Jem and Scout. And Atticus, it took him a while to connect those dots. And when he did, he was like, I don't know if I can cover this up. I can't lie to my kids. I can't have them lie about it. And Sheriff Tate was very much of the idea of, it would be a sin to let everyone know what Mr. Radley has done, Mr. Arthur has done. It would be a sin to have the people of Maycomb descend upon his house when he hasn't interacted with people in 30 plus years. So he's like, I am the sheriff of Maycomb County, and this is what I'm going to say. You cannot fight me. You can try and fight me on this, but I will call you a liar to your face. Let the dead bury the dead, as he said. Just let this go to ground. And Atticus asked Scout if she understood that Mr. Yule fell on his knife, and she said yes, and that they're doing the right things, because if they let everyone know, it'd be like shooting a mockingbird. And Atticus finally made the connection and thanks Mr. Radley for saving the lives of his children. And that is the end of chapter 30. We have one chapter left. I hope you all are enjoying the reading and having a very, very nice day. I will see you all in the next chapter. Bye.